That's fine. Welcome, everyone. My name is Carol Franco, and I'm a research assistant professor at the Institute for Sustainable Solutions here at PSU. I would like to welcome you all to this lecture, and also I would like to welcome the online audience that is watching us via the Solutions Journal website. So today we're going to have a very interesting lecture and a really great panel. And the name of the lecture today is A Business Partnership with Posterity, Creating an Enhanced Operating System for the World's Economy. A couple of announcements is that we're going to wait for questions at the end, and please come forward to the microphone. And we will also have refreshments at the end, and we can continue with the discussion after the talk is over. Now I would like to introduce you to Lang Marsh, and please welcome him, and let's start with the lecture today.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you. I'm Langdon Marsh, and I'm a fellow with the National Policy Consensus Center, which is part of the College of Urban and Public Affairs, the Hatfield School here at PSU. And I wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction to the topic tonight. And our speaker is actually not here yet because he's stuck in traffic on presumably I-84, but says he will be here very soon. So I want to talk a bit about this, the project that has resulted in both the presentation you're going to hear tonight and also in a paper which, let's see, something didn't happen here. I want to advance the slide, and it's not advancing. So this isn't hooked up, I don't think. Okay. Well, as we get that sorted out, what we have done is to get a grant. The student researchers here with me and Hank Patton, the speaker, Professor Craig Shin, who isn't able to be with us tonight, and myself, and we have been working for the last 3 or 4 months on an examination of different systems for solving some of the greatest dilemmas that the planet faces on overconsumption of natural resources, economic systems that don't work for all people. And is it set now? Okay. No. So if you put it on play, would that work? The slideshow? Okay, that's better. Now it works. So this is the report that we came out with just a few days ago, and the Institute for Sustainable Solutions has this now on its website. And if you want to check it out, now the audio, I think, is going a little dry. There we go. You go to the Institute for Sustainable Solutions website, and if you don't have that ability to copy it down from there, it's you can Google Institute Sustainable Solutions and go to the page where there's a tab for solution seminars, and just scroll down to today's topic and click on Read the Background Paper. So you can follow along if you like. Or if you have really great memory and can memorize that web address and plug it in, that's fine too. So the title includes the need for an enhanced operating system for the world's economies. And that has led us to ask a number of questions about why do we have the economic system that we have, what an economy is for, and for whom is it really designed. So the next few bullets here are worth at least 5 or 6 books, but there seems to be a growing idea among thought leaders and academics that the current economy isn't working for the present-day world, and it's certainly not working very well for the future. And so, because capitalism requires for its success to have continuous growth in material throughput, not just growth in good things, but growth in extraction of resources and growth in the consumption of materials, and a focus on short-term profit, that it really can't succeed at solving the dilemma of the problem of too much insecurity for most people, or many people, and the consumption of too much of the world's non-renewable natural resources, as well as the ecosystem services that are needed to deliver services for us and for future generations. So there's been a growing call, which I'll get to in a minute, for a new operating system for the world's economies, both at the global and regional scales. And the purpose of that is to deliver the things that people really want and need, like jobs and wellness, income and personal security, and community health. And also to protect and restore the natural resources that are needed for us and for future generations. So back to the paper that we have just produced and posted. The purpose of this project came out of some ideas of Professor Robert Costanza, who's the head of the Institute for Sustainable Solutions, to give grants to a number of projects over the summer to look at some interesting new ideas, and particularly solutions-oriented ideas. And we took on that challenge, and we're very grateful to have a grant to begin looking at a number of solutions. But we decided, and it was the core of our proposal actually, to look at one system called intergenerational finance that our speaker has developed over the last 30 years. To examine that in detail, and then as a next phase of a project, which we're now working on, to look at other solutions that are at least attempting at the similar scale, ecosystem, regional, and global scales, to deal with the dilemma of too much growth in material consumption and not enough attention to protecting natural resources for the future. So we're going to look at a number of these ideas over the next few months and come up with a second paper at the end of this calendar year that will begin to look at those other ideas and at the criteria for judging them. And I'll show a slide in a minute as to the kinds of criteria that we're looking at to determine whether they would be successful, any of them, including Hank's idea, would be successful at addressing this planetary dilemma. So we're interested in the intergenerational finance idea, which you're going to hear about, because in part it's never been fully documented and presented to a wider audience before. So this is kind of a coming out party for that particular idea. And it's also interesting to us because, unlike many ideas that are out there, it addresses the whole system, the entire planetary system, but also at the local ecosystem and the regional levels. And so it addresses basically the entire system that needs to be reformed. It's also interesting because, unlike a lot of proposals, it relies heavily on the private sector to develop the capacity and the ability to deliver services that are needed within a new institutional framework that's democratically agreed upon and, very importantly, measured extremely carefully, scientifically, over the full life cycle of the outcomes that are being invested in. And it also is interesting because of a new set of investment and market tools, and we will go into those in more detail a little later. So I've sort of gone over this before. I think I went backwards. I sort of went over this before as to the need for doing something now as opposed to waiting for the current systems, the current economic systems to play themselves out over the course of the next few generations. Because, in part, as Dr. Costanza and some of his colleagues have established, we are approaching and in some cases have exceeded planetary boundaries for planetary systems that are extremely important for the future of the human community and for nature as a whole. And I'm going to show this slide, which is taken from an article that he wrote with some colleagues in Solutions Journal, which is produced by the Institute, in the May issue. And this is fascinating because it shows very graphically that some of the systems that we rely on are already not only in deep trouble, but they've exceeded suggested planetary boundaries. So these are 9 systems. The 3 that are way out of whack already include the biodiversity and the biochemistry nitrogen cycle, the human intervention in the nitrogen cycle, and of course climate change is the one that grabs everybody's attention. But there are other systems like freshwater use, ocean acidification, land use, chemical pollution, phosphorus cycle, and so on, that are also extremely important, and they are not yet exceeding, but they're approaching some of the boundaries that the scientists have proposed. So that's the reason for the urgency. Then we also have economists like Tim Jackson, who's a well-known economist in Britain, who has called for a new macroeconomics that puts the needs of people and nature first. And Gus Speth, who has been a leader for now over a generation on sustainability issues, former head of the World Resources Institute, which he founded, and former administrator of the United Nations Development Program. In his new book, The Bridge at the Edge of the World, he has basically called for a fundamental change in our system. Basically, how can the operating instructions for the modern world economy be changed so that the economic activity both protects and restores the natural world? And we would probably add, and produces good outcomes for people today in terms of wellness, income, and other benefits. Now, I talked a little bit earlier about how we are going to approach this next phase of our work. And the first thing we're going to look at are the possible criteria by which to judge many of these new solutions. And without giving away too many secrets, some of the solutions that have been suggested include substantial increases in tax revenue, either by taxing carbon or taxing international financial transactions, or simply raising taxes that are traditional taxes. Some of them are giving the human community control over the planet's commons, things like the atmosphere, water resources, soil, and so forth, and giving that them the opportunity democratically to decide how they should be used. And there are a number of other ideas as well. So we want to judge these proposals against some set of criteria that also would enable us to compare it with the intergenerational finance idea that Hank has proposed. So there are things like, does it produce good outcomes, wellness, and so forth for human beings, healthy ecosystems for nature? Does it avoid the bad stuff like disease and hunger and unsustainable depletion of resources? Does it use scientific measures to judge whether or not it's succeeding in avoiding the bad consequences and getting the new ones the good ones in place? Can it replace unsustainable assets? You might think of uncontrolled or inadequately controlled power plants, for example, as one. Can it replace those with clean ones sufficiently rapidly to avoid the increasing levels of exceedance of these planetary boundaries? Will it be able to amass sufficient capital through bonds or taxes or sovereign funds or whatever to be able to pay for the transfer of equity from those unsustainable assets to new ones, to cleaner ones? Can it provide adequate revenues from whatever sources, including the potential sale of measurable good outcomes into secondary markets through the device of securitization? Not a well-liked term today, but it's actually a pretty sound idea if it's done on a basis that is secure. Is it politically feasible? Would there need to be changes in laws or rules that could be actually put into operation? Is it democratic and voluntary or compulsory and top-down? Are there the appropriate partnerships and institutions that would be created to make it happen? Does it reward entrepreneurship? This is a business arrangement, not a regulatory one. It's to create markets and things that don't have markets now so that good outcomes can be produced. And are the scales right? Can be implemented as a sufficient scales both locally and regionally, and that it can produce good outcomes for the people in their ecosystems, communities at the local level, but also at regional, and produce good outcomes for the regional and global scales as well. In other words, can it produce a lot of small reductions at the local level in greenhouse gases, for example, that could then be aggregated and bundled and applied to the global problem? So those are some of the criteria that we'll be looking at, and I hope that by the end of this year we'll have a sort of a handle on that, and we can get our goal really is to have a conversation that occurs throughout this community here and throughout the country and around the world as to what these best systems might be. Can they be, are some of the ideas capable of being melded? Is there some combination of ideas that would produce a better system for everybody? So what I'm going to do, although he's not here yet, is to introduce Hank, tell you a little bit about him, and the student researchers on our panel. We were planning to have Hank's presentation come first. We may juggle that a little bit. And then you probably will have lots of questions. We hope you do, and comments and ideas. And then we want to end maybe with some questions for you, particularly something like if you were a member of a future generation, what kind of economy would you like us in the present day to have to produce enough benefit for them? And would you, as a member of this present economy, be willing to live in that kind of future-oriented economy? So what I think I'll do is tell you a little bit about Hank, and if he's here by the time I finish, we'll give him the floor. If not, our three student researchers have some short things to say about the project and some ideas that they've come up with. Hank Patton is the chair of an organization called World Steward, which is a not-for-profit. It's located in the Columbia Gorge in the Little White Salmon River watershed, which is across from a little bit west of Hood River. And it's a 1,000-acre preserve that he spent 30 years putting together. And the ideas for how it would be managed are really the foundation for some of the things he's going to talk about today. How to have a sustainable, economically viable, but also natural resource protective system in place. He has been thinking about this and talking about it and producing a wonderful array of slides, some of which he will show you. But it really hasn't been until now that we've been able to work the words together to be able to put it down on paper and present it in that report. Okay, well, I think what we should do is to have our student researchers give some short reports, and we'll start with Tim Kochanski. He is I think he's a marvelous student. He's in the system science program, and Tim, why don't you say a few things about your role?
And is it already on? Do I have to? Is there an on-off button on it? I'm Tim Kochanski, a graduate student in the System Science graduate program, and we are the student research team. We're just finishing up phase one of the project. So for at the beginning, we divided up what we envisioned to be the final project into 8 different areas, and so we each kind of chose a couple of areas and decided to focus on those and to kind of put together lit reviews and build up background research on those different areas. And so my background's in economics and complex systems, so I chose the current economic system because I thought it would be easy to do, and transboundary multi-jurisdictional governance and institutional mechanisms because I had no idea what it was, and so I was guaranteed to learn something. And so then as we progressed with our research, we kind of researched a lot of different mechanisms that are out there, and things like the Puget Sound Project or forestry bond projects, social impact bonds, and stuff that these folks will talk about, and kind of tried to fit them into the continuum of stuff that falls within the intergenerational finance framework that Hank will talk about later. So that's to fit projects into the current economic system and to see how those projects are successful or not successful in creating the outcomes that Lang was talking about. And then for the multi-jurisdictional governance stuff, we researched issues on what do you do if you have something like a river basin or a large geographic resource that spans a lot of jurisdictions. So the Chesapeake Bay, I think, involves 5 states and the District of Columbia, or the Columbia River Basin has a number of state agencies that would need to play an active role in governing that resource. And so we looked at issues associated with when a resource spans multiple jurisdictions. How do you build collaboration amongst the participating agencies, and if it affects different sectors, different industries, participation across different industries. And then as somebody that's trained as an economist, the things that were most interesting to me were the relationship between, or focusing on the relationship between ecosystem services, or land as a resource that can, like capital, be invested in or depreciate, and provides outcomes, provides economic outcomes. in a Main Street, you could pick up any newspaper or turn on the news, and it'd be pretty easy to hear a story on how creating jobs will fuel the economy, and economic growth then leads to increased income, wealth, which allows us to purchase things like good health, clean water, and all those sorts of things. That's a pretty common argument. So the relationship between GDP, inflation, and unemployment is kind of well established in the macroeconomics literature over the last 60 or 70 years. And so but GDP itself is kind of a crude measure of, admittedly, in any textbook, it'll say there's stuff that doesn't get counted in GDP. It's tough to collect numbers to get a GDP measure. And it only indirectly considers outcomes like health, clean soil, clean water, clean air, and all those other quality of life and well-being measures. And so also when we think of markets as producing, the markets that produce output and GDP, economic output, we think of the markets can fail. So if there are negative externalities, pollution, for example, then within that framework, we would say, well, the market demand is greater than the social demand, or the market costs aren't taking into consideration all of the true social costs. So we'd say, we're overproducing, we have to cut back, regulate or tax an industry and redistribute wealth to offset or try and correct that market failure. And so GDP is an inaccurate measure, but at the same time, over the last 30 years or so, there have been a lot of advances in collecting metrics on those things that are considered externalities. Different types of pollutions and effluent, and even for everybody that was here last week, Professor Chang talked about the temperature of the river, water temperature. So the metrics associated with negative externalities have become more and more accurate. And so one of the things that is neat about this project is that we are exploring different mechanisms that we can create markets for offsets to those externalities. So last week, Professor Chang talked about planting riparian investments, planting trees along the shores to shade the river to lower the temperature. And a tree is a carbon sequestration machine too, right? So if those things can be measured, then if we can create markets for those, for externality offsets, then that's can allow for markets to emerge in offsetting the things that we typically associate with externalities. And then what Hank will mention also, what he'll call redemption systems, are the markets don't necessarily just have to focus on negative externalities as a way to improve positive outcomes, but also to just go straight for markets for clean soils or cleaner water, or improved health, et cetera. So that's something that I've found particularly interesting about the project, and that's what's made it so fun to work on. And at the same time, as Lang mentioned, those same mechanisms can steer the economy within safe operating bounds. And so I'm looking forward to phase 2 and putting together case studies, hopefully, and kind of fleshing out that matrix of, or the matrix of that contains the continuum of all the things that fall within the framework of what Hank defines as intergenerational finance, and to kind of see what's worked out there, what are the different attributes of the different systems, and to to put those together into a second report.
Great.
So with that, I'll pass it off to Michael.
All right. Introduce yourself, Michael.
So my name is Michael Weisdorf. I'm also a graduate student in the systems science program here at Portland State. My systems of interest are ecological and economic systems, and I've been doing a lot of work looking at how models of ecology and economics can be integrated together, which is what brought me to this project. I was extremely intrigued by the first time I heard of intergenerational finance. It's pretty common in discussions of environmental and ecological economics to hear about externalities, external costs, social costs, some of the things Tim was just touching on. And the real sort of genius of this idea, as far as I've been able to tell, is that intergenerational finance allows us to turn those external costs into essentially external benefits. We all know that we want things like clean water, clean air, good schools, communities with jobs in them, low incidence of disease, reductions in public health problems of every kind. But the current economic system is not particularly well suited to aggregating large amounts of capital for those purposes. In fact, the current economic system really excels at directing large capital investments towards systems that actually exacerbate those problems or create new problems that we've never even heard of before. The idea is that there's an institution or an institutional role missing from this equation. There's one sort of concern that's not really being looked out for in the current economic paradigm, and that's really posterity. The role of advocate for future generations is just not being played by any of the current participants in the market. And that's often lamented by ecological economists. If only there were some way that future generations could write checks or sit down at the bargaining table today, maybe we could get the prices right. The proposal here is really to do just that, to create institutions or coalitions of institutions that will represent the interests of future generations and will bargain with the needs of today in order to find solutions which satisfy all of our demands. Not only our demands for profit and increased incomes, but also our demands for clean air and clean water and healthy ecosystems and healthy communities and vibrant local economies. So the basic way that an intergenerational finance institution would go about procuring those desirable outcomes is simply to open a bidding process to sustainable entrepreneurs of every stripe for delivery of specific outcomes. What do I mean by outcomes? Well, it really is a pretty broad term. Essentially, a lot of the things that we tend to think about as desirable social and environmental outcomes would be right near the top of the list, but there's no fixed, limit. There's no one master list of desirable social outcomes. Anything that a local community deemed to be desirable through its own sort of deliberative or democratic processes could be eligible for financing through an intergenerational finance type model. The key to being able to write contracts for these sort of ephemeral or intangible social and environmental outcomes is having a consistent, set of standard metrics that are used to assess them. In markets where metrics are already, widely disseminated, or in markets for, say, energy, where your natural gas line has a meter on it, or your electric power bill will tell you exactly how much juice you're using every month. It's pretty easy to sort of come up with standard contracts. But in some of the other areas that we really care about, such as the biodiversity of our ecosystems, or the rates of poverty or disease in our communities, it's a bit trickier to come up with a standard quantifiable metric that you could actually write into an irrevocable, enforceable contract. There are several models that we've looked at during the course of our research. Life cycle analysis is an international standardization organization standard, I guess, that has been published in all the participating countries of that body, which essentially looks at the material and energy inputs to any given industrial process. Many authors in the sort of sustainability literature have advocated for the expansion of life cycle analysis to include some of these less tangible inputs and outputs, such as social benefits. Social life cycle analysis is a phrase that is often found in this literature today. The real benefit of having an internationalized set of standards is that you're not any longer just dependent on things that can be translated directly into dollars through commercial markets to assess these contracts, but say a local government could enter into a contract to provide a certain number of jobs within its jurisdiction, or a local health insurer in the Pacific Northwest could enter into a contract to reduce the incidence of lung cancer, and therefore the amount of money it would have to spend treating cancer patients who are insured by its policies. By combining a number of different outcomes, many of which are well represented in the actual demand of human beings and our communities, into one unified project that seeks to assess all of the integrated aspects of our list of desirable outcomes, we are able to raise the necessary capital to accelerate redevelopment of our current infrastructure, retire some of the sort of worst performing assets in terms of social and environmental costs, and therefore avoid the cost of mediating all those problems after the fact. The role of early intervention is well established at this point, and we're essentially offering financial markets an opportunity to cash in on the tremendous savings that are offered by avoiding some of those cost burdens in the future. I think I'll just say one more word here about the question of scale. Intergenerational finance is definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution, but it can be implemented at a number of different sort of bioregional statewide, national, international scales. The real vision here is that an IGF institution would be tied to a specific place, and therefore the well-being of that place and its ecosystem and the human community there are really at the forefront of the mission statement of this institution. In other words, protecting the interests of that place is the legally accountable trust of the institution, and that element is absolutely essential to ensuring we can protect our communities and our ecosystems in perpetuity. I guess I'll turn it over to Jenna.
Okay. Hi. I'm Jenna Knobloch. I'm a student here working on my BA in economics. And what really attracted me to IGF is the opportunity to foster a more integrated approach, not only to payment mechanisms for ecosystem services, but for other social and economic goals as well. It's an opportunity to encourage more systemic thinking to projects by having finance administered and vetted on a bioregional scale. And sort of my area of research was in looking at really promising social innovations that are going on today that can inform the development of IGF. And I'm just going to briefly go over a couple of more salient examples. A really promising innovation, specifically in finance, is the social impact bond. There's not a lot of examples. There's only one pilot that's started, and it only started last year. But the idea is that you reward investors for funding programs that lighten the burden of local governments. This is especially useful in areas where prevention is much less expensive than the cost of after the fact. The pilot in the UK looks at released prisoners who've served less than a year at the specific prison. The recidivism rate is upwards of 60% of people end up back in jail within a year of being released, and the investors fund various organizations which aim to reduce reoffending rates, and the investors can make back a return only if the reduction in recidivism is deemed statistically significant. And the impact is measured by an outside contractor paid for the government. And, in this situation, the government has less expenditure. There's less, there's community benefits, obviously, to less people going to jail, and so it's sort of a win-win situation. Another example that hasn't actually existed yet, but is also really promising, is the community forestry bond. The community forestry bonds are, first of all, they're long-term bonds to finance the purchasing of a forest, which is then paid back with sustainable forest activities. The first proposal of this was was up near Seattle. However, Congress failed to vote making such a bonds tax exempt, so this didn't fall through. But here in Oregon, we passed the Oregon Community Forestry Bill, which allows municipalities to create separate authorities which can issue bonds to pay for forests, and then can slowly, be paid back to the bondholders with, sort of long-term thinking management of the bonds. The last example is one that has an international reputation, is the New York City Watershed Agreement. The context is that when pollution upstate started threatening New York City water quality, the city was faced with the choice of building a $48 billion water filtration plant, which would also have millions of dollars in operational costs, or move to protect upstate watersheds so that they could just continue to pipe in the naturally filtered water by the forest there. So they took a sort of new approach to reducing pollution, and they engage the residents in a voluntary in a voluntary system of, increased environmental regulations, but the city also invested in community and economic development projects. This has had a net positive impact. Despite the increased economic costs of, environmental regulations, the job growth has not only been positive, but exceeded other areas in upstate New York. And this is an example of a project that links community development, reduced budgetary goals, and environmental outcomes. These examples, could be very relevant building blocks to creating, new ways to build incentives and investment for quality outcomes, and encourage more integrated planning for projects. So that's about it.
Thank you. This has been a great group of students to work with, and I really appreciate the depth they went into understanding this complex set of issues. And now the man you've all been waiting for, fresh from ID4, I think, and the chair of the Biodiversity Reserve in Little White Salmon Watershed, Hank Patton.
Have any of you ever received a check from future generations? The check's in the mail? I think our world is governed by a set of core beliefs. How we manage our resources is governed by what we believe. If we believe the glass is half empty, we're inclined to behave that way. And if we believe it's half full, we take a different approach. One of the core beliefs that we hold in this society is that we need fuel. And we have to burn fuel. And when you burn fuel, you have consequences. Burn this, and what do you get? I'll give you a multiple choice, 2 choices. Do you get raspberries, or do you get knocks and socks? Come on now. 50-50 chance you'll get it right. Come on, somebody be brave. What's the answer to this question? It's one or the other. What's the answer? You shut up. You know the answer. Why is it raspberries, folks? Because the society we're talking about burns honey. And when you burn honey, you get raspberries. Is the glass half empty or half full? Do you want knocks and socks, or do you want healthy children in your garden? Burn this, and what do you get? So here we are in a historical perspective. If you are in the middle of the blue zone, your view of the world is a little distorted. But if you look at the time frame from when human society began to behave and to where we are going to be in a not too distant future, the blue zone is almost irrelevant unless you begin to change the way life works on the planet. And when you do that, there are future consequences. And if you hide those consequences, you begin to have problems. The problems in the traditional management regime that we are all very familiar with, we've come in this new discipline of partnering with the future, or intergenerational partnership, or intergenerational finance, to look at the contemporary management regime as a two-sided one, where producers produce, consumers consume, regulators regulate, and everything goes downhill. You're familiar with this pattern. Externalized costs, if the glass is half empty, you're inclined to ignore them because you don't have a lot of resources, things are getting tough, and it's headed downhill, and you better not worry about the end of the pipe. If the glass is half full, it's not a cost, it's an opportunity. Because the future value of not causing these negative impacts upon the planet is what? Is it valuable? Anybody disagree? Doing this stuff, if I just pop back a few slides here, if you look at the emissions from a coal thermal plant, we did what we call a histogram profile of the Mojave generating station, which actually lost its right to operate because of the externality at about 10 minutes after 1, if this were a clock, air opacity. They got 40,000 violations, air quality violations from a coal thermal plant operating in the Mojave Indian Reservation. But in actual fact, it was a lot more complicated than that. If you look at the other costs, the sulfur dioxide was worth $50 million a year. The mental retardation costs, you're looking at $3,000 a pound, according to the Secretary of Health in Indiana. The particulate emissions, the PM10, the asthma costs, just in tons, you were looking at 2,000 tons a year. And, of course, that was falling in a social equity evaluation matrix right into the middle of the first people's space, children's space. Not a good thing to do by most ways of measuring things. And all sorts of other significant costs that add up to, in the view of intergenerational markets, a big opportunity. The value of not doing this is big. But cartoons are helpful. The blue box there is what we call trapped equity. We have a huge vested interest in doing the wrong thing. And the politics and the parliaments are, as everyone here knows, significantly influenced by the folks who have these very significant capital investments tied up in these old models. And you don't stop doing that on Thursday afternoon at 4:15 because your teenage daughter said, that's what you should do, Dad. You go to work because you want to do the college fund, you want to pay your rent and the health insurance and everything else. You have trapped equity as a worker, you have trapped equity as an owner, as a manager. Trapped equity governs how we think and what we do in our political economy. This is a problem. But what's on the other side of that blue barrier is what we call in the slang that kind of emerges when you work on something with a fun group like these fabulous students and Lang and the many wonderful people in this institution that I'm really enjoying. We call it the big bag, the larger wealth. Just give me a hands up here. Which creates more wealth? Managing the world as though the future mattered, or managing the world as though the future doesn't matter? What's going to create more real wealth? As if it mattered, as if it didn't matter. Where's the real wealth lie? Anybody want to take a wild guess? So the insight, therefore, is that the bigger bag is actually more than a full glass. It's the larger wealth. And that is the core idea that underlies managing resources in partnership with future generations. Now, it's not as though they don't have a credit card that we haven't figured out how to use. Because we know future generations are taxpayers, and their ability to pay taxes is guaranteeing what? They're paying all the additional costs through their ability to underwrite national debt that the taxpayers and the corporate interests and the folks who presently don't want to pay taxes are not paying. We go into the world credit market with our grandchildren's credit card, and we put it on the card effectively. So it's not as though we haven't figured out how to use the credit worthiness of those who come after us. But it's a little bit like finding somebody else's wallet when you sit down at the restaurant, right? and saying, oh, let's have dinner. And it's really not a good way to run a railroad. And these are shifting consequences. If you intervene early and pick any problem that you ever encountered, from invasive weeds to alcoholism to drug addiction to obesity, the earlier you intervene, the less it costs and the more value you create. So a core insight in intergenerational stewardship is to imagine the most effective early intervention strategy. Out in the gorge in our wildlife refuge, we have a lot of invasive weeds. And there is also quite a list of new ones that are coming in. And boy, I wish I could have talked to the guy who put a pretty bush called Scots broom on a four-masted boat about 112 years ago, because he I'd saved myself a lot of trouble. And by the way, we do have, and this is where there's an interesting rule, another axiom in IGF. We call it the inverse perverse rule, and that is that the more important something is, frequently the harder it is to measure. The more important something is, the harder it is to measure. And it's when you go out into a field and there's 26 million plants growing there, one of them may be the first of a new invasive species. And it's very hard to teach people to see something they've never seen before. And you know, there's an interesting, complex dynamic between knowing a big problem before it happens and acting in a timely way to intervene. But I'd like you to recognize you can either look at this as an, oh my God, this schematic, or everything that's read from the perspective of the discipline of IGF is a business opportunity. It's really valuable to pay somebody to intervene before the moment of escape. And we know this. Ask any professional who has to deal with a contagion of any kind. Do you want to wait till Ebola is in Seattle, or would you like to catch it before they get on the airplane? You know, and it goes on and on from there. So there's a great deal of value there. This is a schematic that's intended to illustrate the importance of thinking about the interconnectivity of outcomes. If the red line is exactly the same line we were looking at, but it's the avoided costs of being a fat nation. Intervening early yields a great deal of value, and it accumulates in significant ways in other sectors that you may not think immediately as directly linked. But in actual fact, there are obviously huge health and employment and personal well-being implications that are an incremental part of the costs that accumulate as you delay in intervening in the wellness agenda of an individual. If you move the dotted line to the left, the accumulated or the aggregated cost of the intervention and the benefit to the receiving party are obviously go up significantly. And if you move it to the right, you're in a crisis, and pretty soon you're dead. So, given there's more real wealth in managing resources as though the future mattered, how could we possibly take this idea of more wealth and turn it into an operating system? This is another way of making energy available to society, and it has a different profile. This is an output from a software package we developed for redevelopment scenario analysis, and these are what we call the first order effects. And it's fascinating for me to have the privilege of working with Bob Costanza and Jennifer and all the thinkers in this group here who have such a history of studying the detail of consequence. When you manage a resource in a particular way, what do you get? What are the outcomes? And Costanza's work is internationally famous. I think one of the papers that he published is the second most cited paper of all time in the Nature inventory of environmental, the value of the natural economy. So what you see here and the spread between the earlier histogram of the coal power plant, every line is an opportunity for, as Jenna just was describing to you, an impact bond. And we imagine that a standard framework for bringing measurable problems into an environment where there are teams who think about design that delivers value is a business solution to which uses value creation in the way business uses value creation that could be applied to these complex problems that we are dealing with. I'm going to detour with a slide by probably one of the greatest teachers in my life, someone you all probably know and have read, Amory Lovins. But this is a really amazing slide when you look at it. Because what Amory did was turn most people's thinking on their head. This is a supply curve, and the green line is showing you an increasing price for conservation measures until you get to the red line where each measure is no longer cost effective, meaning it doesn't pay to buy the measure, which may be very expensive windows. And what's beautiful about this is he had this insight, and it governs a huge amount of the way I have been thinking about these issues. But his insight was that don't buy that measure, but when you're studying it, just put it in a bin. Aggregate the incremental benefits of all the different ways that you could make energy use lower in that building until suddenly, boom, he calls it tunneling through the cost barrier. You have so many conservation assets, you no longer need to buy a heating plant. You no longer need to build a room with a roof in which you put the heating plant, and you don't have to replace the heating plant in 20 years. What a profound insight that is. Because he shows that if you bundle outcomes, I've got 10 minutes left, my team is making sure I know. If you bundle those outcomes, you're going to capture a transformative opportunity. And one of the key roles of IGF is to provide a framework by which not an end-of-pipe solution can be taped onto a dirty asset, but by which you can take the asset completely apart and rebuild it to deliver multiple outcomes. So, thank you, Amory. Anyone know what that sign in the lower right means? Japanese character? Muda. Waste. No muda. So how do we unlock the big bag? How do we get there? We've there's the key. The golden key has 3 bumps on or tumblers in the lock, and we perceive that there are 3 classes of barrier. This work that we're talking about here is sufficiently complex that you're always looking for more simple ways to describe it. And the 3 primary barriers that you face are what? I named one of them. We all own the wrong stuff, right? What do we call that? Trapped equity. That's a huge barrier. And it's not just the cars that we own and then the railway trains that are designed to carry coal and all the people that have bought the steam shovels and all the people trained to operate the steam shovels. It's not just that. It's that our belief structure is based on the conviction that we have to do it that way because we don't have enough money to do it any other way. Not true. So trapped equity. Capital jobs are stuck in the old hardware and the old dangerous fuels equally stuck the politics and the parliament. So that's the first tumbler in the lock. Second barrier, we'll move to the other side of the key in just a second. The second critical issue here is what we call the unmeasured consequences issue. And this is where Costanza and his group and the whole vision of solutions is so powerful, because they've been thinking about everything else. It's not just about money. It's about a complicated living fabric of relationships. And if we don't measure that stuff, we can't manage it. This classic buzz phrase in these recent seasons, if we value what we measure. You don't value it, you can't measure it. You also can't make a market in it. So that's obviously a huge issue. And this is the one that really IGF brings to the gift that I hope we're communicating clearly to you and why we're so excited about these ideas. And it's called the Transactional Framework. There has not heretofore and presently still is not a buyer for long-term outcomes. It's all the quarterly report. This is a problem. If there's no buyer for stuff that's going to happen to you in 10 years, how are we ever going to steer the ship? It's guaranteed to go to places where we at least don't know and probably don't want to go. So what are the tumblers in the lock? The first one is you've got to have a way of moving your capital, a way of getting your chips back. This is what we call the equity relocation function. And we're not talking about issuing checks for inflated values to fat cats who've been screwing us for 50 years. That's not what we had in mind. But we are interested in inviting people to get a first mover advantage by retiring legal dirty assets. These are dirty assets and they're legal. We burn this stuff every day. Most of you did today in some measure or another. So we're all stuck with this problem. But what if there were a framework by which you could take early retirement for that asset and bid in a fair, transparent environment against other companies that wanted to get first mover advantage in a clean new technology? That's a valuable place to be. And if you get people bidding against each other, it's not going to be a full replacement cost, believe me. And I do believe for us, what we call a threshold value is that if the costs that you offset, that you prevent happening to the future are greater than what you had to pay, that sounds like, to me, that a reasonable definition of an okay investment, that moment of escape. And when you throw in losing all the ice on the planet, which is one of those costs that's in this equation, it may be a bargain to get rapid action. Okay, your second big tumbler here, the critical tumbler, is you've got to have a standard third-party system for measuring real outcomes. I'm not talking the rear-view mirror indicator approach to looking at stuff where you wait until the end of the year and you figure how you did it wrong. That's not what we had in mind. The trick is to understand what's really happening, and in a way that can be bid by people who make things and do things. The way these are not front page stories. These are issued in the back of the Financial Times, where invitations to bid to deliver the same kind of stuff we deliver when we build bridges. Only these are outcomes. The third, okay, Lang, I'm watching you. I'm down to 5 minutes now. He's a fabulous manager. You need a multi-sector, deep time. Deep time means life cycle framework for transactions, which means you need somebody who's acting as a trustee. No one, by the way, I've never, that I know of, heard any congressman on the floor of the Congress stand up and say, since we're about to lay a $700 billion bill on our grandchildren, maybe we should hold a moment of silence here and think whether or not this $700 billion that we're about to ask them to pay might actually be good for them or not. Has anybody ever heard that question asked? Isn't it about time? So that's what this system is intended to do, is to create a forum in which you can invite proposals to create value for the future and use the same system we've been using to rip off the future to deliver value to the future and build our way out of this hole. So this is the old model. What does the new one look like? Who did we just bring into the transaction? Now it's not two parties anymore. Who's the third one? Your grandchildren. Now they're in the picture, and that's what it looks like. Now business has two clients, not one. And they can parse their services and their products to two markets. The chef does not want a soil conservation district, particularly when he's making dinner. He wants a zucchini. Future generations don't need a zucchini. It'll be in bad shape by then. Future generations want a soil conservation district. So you are parsing the service that organic farming, for example, delivers. And the reason why there's a lot of spread between so-called commercial or chemically produced zucchini and organic zucchini is that you're forcing all of those externalities into a very short-term, sometimes a 2 or 3 year transaction, whereas the true costs of that stewardship should be distributed over the term of the benefits, which is, when you're talking about soil, perpetual. We're in trouble when we don't have soil, folk. So I'm just going to, in my last minute here, throw you one that, since this wonderful group of students has created there is a design community in PSU talking about a biogas operation. So we've created a little example of how to relocate trapped investments. If you had two old-style businesses, a laundromat and a greenhouse, what could we do with these two classic old-style businesses? Anybody want to mash them up? What would it look like? There's all sorts of fun stuff. It could be a zero-waste, radically productive and beautiful and fun space to be. And I have to say, I have never worked with such bright and wonderful young people in my career. It's a really good sign that old guys like Lang and I get to work with this kind of help, and more power to them. So there's your quick intro. So we'll take some questions, yeah?
Thanks, Hank. We're going to move to the question period now, and we're going to ask you to come to that mic in the middle of the room, about the third row, and ask your questions. It would be helpful if you lined up so that we don't have much space between questioners. Does anybody want to take the first crack? And it could be a question, a comment, a disagreement, whatever you like. But we would really like to hear from those of you who have come here probably because you've been thinking about how the system could be different. So, anybody want to take the first crack? Okay. There we go.
Hello, Hank. My name is Judy Barnes, and I wondered, as you know, we talked about a model for producing more renewable energy that I and the group I'm working with, Oregonians for Renewable Energy Policy, has been advocating for in Oregon, and that's this thing that's used in 80 countries around the world called the feed-in tariff. And of course, it fills many of the requirements of what you were talking about, what they were talking about earlier. Provides sufficient revenues, attracts capital, and I wondered. One of the issues we have around it, though, one of the difficulties, is determining cost effectiveness. Okay, because the model requires that you pay the real cost for renewable energy now. Okay, which is higher than fossil fuels, mainly because we don't pay for their externalities, and they are highly, highly subsidized. So the cost of renewable energy now is more expensive, and because you're also building infrastructure. But the cost of it to come will be comparatively lower. And I wondered if you have any advice on how you apply the intergenerational financing model to that question of cost effectiveness of investing in renewable energy now. And any comments on the feed-in tariff model as well. Thank you.
Well, that's really an extremely well-targeted question because, and I know some of our team here have thought about that and care about that issue a great deal. The feed-in tariffs have been extremely effective, and one of the reasons why Germany is the leading European manufacturer of solar is because they had this ability to guarantee a price for an irrevocable term. And I think Tim has some thoughts on this that I would like to ask him to share because he's been thinking about it. But the key word for me in this one has been irrevocable. That in our finger in the wind political space, if manufacturers think that the solar tax credits may or may not be there in 17 months, are you going to commit $800 million to a fab? Or not very likely. So it's been an extremely unstable space in this country. So the irrevocable contract act is very powerful. We have taken the view that a watershed-based system of financing that incorporates all the true costs so that you look at what's really happening over the life cycle is the only way to finance energy infrastructure, and which addresses, Judy, I think, an issue that you were talking about there, which is really the game is kind of pretty dramatically skewed the way we've been doing business. The other thing that IGF lends to this that is so powerful is what I think of as a feed-out tariff. The feed-in is the energy that's going into the grid, and you get paid a good rate for that, which means it becomes bankable. You have a contract for the solar collectors on your house you can take to the bank, and that means people don't have to pay so much for their fuel. They're net revenue positive, and the local solar people have jobs building clean infrastructure. Doesn't that sound like a good idea? And it's cheaper over the long haul, but particularly the positive externalities generated by these clean systems can be vetted, bundled, and sold in secondary markets. And that's what we call the feed-out tariff. And if you aggregate the feed-out, you get a very dramatic change. It's essentially the real number that you want to know. What does it really cost? What if you retire a dirty asset, replace it with a clean asset? You're getting the spread between those two, and that's a lot. There's a lot of value there. And Tim might want to add something to that.
Recently read through the UK Department of Energy and Climate Change. They have a case study on there where an old physics instructor, he spent his retirement investing in his house, and so the way that was structured, it depends on whether it's a new construction or existing construction. There's the feed-in tariff, the amount that you, even just generating your own electricity and consuming that, I think the rate was like 37, depending on a bunch of other attributes, like 37 pence per kilowatt hour. And then if you produce enough to feed into the grid, it's an additional 3 pence per kilowatt hour. And then for the case study that they have on the site, he had done a few other things to invest in his house, and so with insulation and a whole other spectrum of improvements. But I think he calculated as a personal investment on return to be like 5 to 7%, and that's completely net of carbon offsets and everything outside the household system. But so you could think of aggregating that across households in a region, and the larger effects of that, and also the carbon offsets from that. That's all I've got.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Got a couple of questions from our online audience. One of the panelists described intergenerational finance as being tied to a specific place. Yet I wonder how. One of the panelists described intergenerational finance as being tied to a specific place. Yet this online listener asks, I wonder how that works when thinking internationally. can you expand on how this would work on an international scale?
Thank you. Well, we actually think that place-based solutions are causing global problems and are so-called solutions, and that place-based solutions are going to make a lot of significant global problems go away. So, but one of the, I don't know how many of you had the privilege of listening to Eleanor Ostrom when she did her talk here in Portland a month or so ago, but or read her work in the Solutions Journal with Robert and his team. But polycentric systems is an insight that she's shared with the world, and a polycentric system permits you to function at different scales depending on where and how things fit together. The scale could be very large, or they can be medium or quite small. So the same kind of capital that would redevelop a inefficient laundromat and an efficient greenhouse into a very efficient solar biogas plant on a college campus or in a village. That same capital, even though it's doing tiny little laundromat projects in Eastern Oregon, could also be doing a major redevelopment of Centralia or Boardman with a global atmosphere as a major consideration in that transaction. And the price of the redevelopment and the other values that are delivered at that very regional scale would, I think, show that a clean energy early intervention, remember the curve where it gets more expensive the longer you wait, that early intervention could make some very interesting projects cost effective. And that's even after the recent agreement, for example, on the Boardman plant. I think it could be redeveloped. At the even larger scale, I don't know anything. I haven't seen no proposals except the one that we have presented to you tonight that could address a problem as gigantic as the Mississippi dead zone, where you've got, how many states, Lang, was it? 21. And some very sophisticated analysis being done, but no transactional framework. I mean, it's out of control, and we're killing. Because this is being recorded, I don't want to quote the wrong number, but I think the latest number is there's 36 dead zones around the planet. You marine biologists straighten me out, but that's growing fast, and they're out of control, and you don't know one until you find it, and it's a big ocean out there. So these are not pretty pictures.
One more. Representing our online audience here. So if money is banked, who is in charge? And how do we keep the funds from being looted, as, for example, our social security system?
Who runs the bank? Was that the question? Good. Obviously, fiduciary trust is at the center of this, and I do believe that there are some very fine utility-type structures that are transparent. Personally, would advocate in all of these models that the representatives be elected, that they run fairly and openly with their qualifications to serve as trustees. Existing utility structures are pretty effective, although sometimes they're embedded in historical boundaries that are awkward. One, because they're not ecosystem boundaries, they're human boundaries, they're legal boundaries, property boundaries. But the underlying issue is transparency, good accounting. All the allocations would have to be bid. I personally view that trustees should have to literally swear an oath to serve the best interests of the future. Be an interesting oath to hear somebody take. and all of the other traditional expectations that we have of accounting would have to be in place. The beauty of the system we're proposing, of course, is it's accounting for whole system life cycle costs, not just money. So there are other consequences that would get good accounting through this mechanism.
Well, I think we're at the end of our time, isn't that right? So we're really interested to know what you think, and not necessarily right this minute because we've run out of time. But please contact us, find some way through ISS or I don't know if the presentations are not posted themselves, right? Just the YouTube. So, but you can go to YouTube and find our addresses or come and see us afterwards. We'd love to have you participate, to contribute. This is a long exploration. We're at a very exciting phase, and you know, this is the biggest problem the planet faces, and I think it's a great opportunity to get the best of thinking as to how to proceed. So with that, thank you very much. Thank the audience out there on the web, and appreciate your coming tonight. Thanks a lot. Oh yes, the refreshments are. Yeah, 15 minutes. We have to be out of here, but let's continue the talk until then.
So there's your question.
And there's Hank's.
There's
web.